All righty. So we want to thank you all for joining us again, and I guess we'll. When y'all come play this play it up for us. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, of course, we went over a few things with y'all a couple of weeks. Um, thank you. A couple of weeks ago, and we did two series with you all so far, and we want to tackle another issue, another something else that has been an issue in you all's marriage, and that's, uh, I guess you could say, what would you describe it as, Brother Tanks? Y'all are muted.
Oh, because yours has a lot of stuff on it. I don't know exactly what to call it. I just know that it's a lot of um I can't think of what the word is to use for it, but well, I guess you could say it's different parenting skills. I guess you could say like different outlooks on different things with the children, boundaries and things like that.
So basically, the children and the different ways to rear them, I guess, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
sir.
All right. Okay. So what do you notice in your home?
Um, it's like the children they don't really have structure the way they're supposed to with doing a lot of different things, but um, like when they know I'm home and they see like they see me, it's like they line up the way they're supposed to, But when it's just um, my wife and the children, it seems like a lot of chaos. The children are pretty much, I guess you say, like running the house. Just doing whatever they want to do to a certain extent.
So, Sister Tanks, would you, in your own words, describe what it's like, kind of like what your husband just did?
Um, I feel like the boundaries are not there, and I don't see a lot of things that my husband sees.
Say it again. We can't hardly hear you.
You gotta talk. You gotta talk louder.
I was saying, the boundaries are not there, and they know that with me they can get away with a lot more stuff. And I feel like sometimes I get worn down.
So what was the last thing you said?
I get worn down easily.
Okay. You address that. She said she get worn down even.
Oh, okay. Um, so I think I want to pick up from our conversation earlier. Sister Tanks and I were having. It was just a brief conversation. We were, kind of saying hello, and I, asked a couple of questions, which kind of um, was moving into this conversation that we're having now. And one of the things, that I want to share, and I just told her I would wait to respond, to later. Um, just thinking about, like wives and, like mothers having the responsibility that they have, as you say, like you get worn out with it. And, one of the things that, we've kind of talked about it in the past in different settings, but a lot of times, women will have this imbalance. Like, so we know that, we're made to be nurturers. Um, in our God-given nature, we just naturally we will nurture, our children, but we're also made, um, the Lord made us to be followers, supporters, submissive. Um, what happens though is when the woman is not submitted to her authority like she's supposed to, the way God intended, what happens then is there's an imbalance there. And these are things that we've talked about, but that imbalance comes when most of your um, love and attention, the submissiveness, um, these things are supposed to be in line with in the marriage, in order in the marriage first. Because of course we know the marriage is going to be the foundation of the family. So of course, as wives, we have to be in line with our husbands. And so you have this real imbalance that happens when the wife is not submitting, and she's not supportive, and she's not um, managing or organizing the home in the way that pleases her husband. So then it only leaves room for all of those things that are in her naturally to go towards the children. And so that's what you end up seeing. Whereas when it's not that we have to change our nature. That's not the thing. It's not that we're not supposed to be the nurturer and manage the home and do things and just enjoy our families. You don't have to give that up. And I think sometimes women are not able to really get in the middle and get that balance going where I can love my husband and I can submit and I can be everything that I'm supposed to be as a wife so that I can be everything that I'm supposed to be as a mother. I think sometimes, of course, we've heard, especially in the world, women will say, I'm not going to put any man before my children, but we know that we don't do things, by the world standard. God has an order, and we know what that order is, where the wife is submitted to her husband or to her male authority, if it's just a godly woman submitted to her male authority, and then the children fall under that. And so when that is not happening by default, all of that, even the submissiveness, as odd as it may seem, their wife or that mother will start to submit to the children and let them have their way. And so that's what happens. So now, so when your husband is saying, it seems like the children to an extent kind of run the house and doing whatever they want to do, that's the result of it. Um, because it has to be in our hearts that it's okay. And I think about a commercial that I've seen recently, with all the COVID-19 things going on and people having to work from home. There are these commercials that show like a video conference just like what we're on, and it's kind of like this undertone of the people trying to have a meeting and their children are in the background and they can't get them under control. So you see the children popping in and out of the camera, and the parents trying to hide them or trying to shoo them away, but they don't have control over them. And another, to me, undertone of that is, um, some people may look at that as being normal, but it kind of goes back to the message that we had back in May, about us being of the same judgment, of the same mind, being on one accord. The word says, as a man thinketh, so is he. And so if we believe the word and believe that, number one, we're supposed to train our children according to the word, that we're supposed to be, as wives, submitted to our husbands, or as godly women, submitted to an authority, um, to that male authority, then that's what we have to, that's the standard that we have to line up with. And when that doesn't happen, then of course there's chaos. But I think you mentioned, Sister Tanks, that that the boundaries aren't there, and that's the thing. As parents, we have to be okay with boundaries, because when we're okay with setting boundaries, then our children will know that they have to abide by those boundaries. And it's one of these things, where we can't feel bad or feel the need to explain away their hurt feelings because, hey, I need you to sit down for an hour while I have a conference call and I need you to be quiet. Or I need you to not talk to me, while I'm on the phone talking to anybody. That was one of the rules that was set very, very early on. I think, when our oldest children, just starting out, when they were like 1.5, when they could talk, they came to understand, if I'm talking to another adult or if I'm on the phone, you can't get my attention right now, and that's okay. The child needs to be okay with that, and the parents need to be okay with that. You know, and but if it's not in your heart, then you won't be able to really carry that out with your children. And I think about, again, sometimes women can use the excuse that, oh, I'm a nurturer, it's hard, and I understand that, like, it's difficult to whip your children. Nobody gets pleasure out of, like, whipping them, but you have to do that for their sake. You don't get pleasure out of even taking privileges away from them, but you know that you have to do that. You don't, there's no pleasure in it besides the fact that you hope they grow from it. But you can't go into a pity party and go into depression with them, making them think that there's something wrong with it. And another example I thought about concerning boundaries is, this idea that when we go out to drive, most of us, we have a driver's license and we've already read the driver's ed book and we learn the rules of the road. And we keep that with us. That's in our heart. So when we go out to drive, we don't have to pull out the book to remind ourselves of, what is the stop sign for? What is the yield sign for? What is the flashing yellow lights for? We know these things because we know it's detrimental to our life and the lives of others. And that's the way it has to be when it comes to us dealing with our children in the Word of God. The Word has to be in our heart, the same way all the rules of the road are when we go out to drive. It has to be just that important to us that, our children's lives, spiritually and naturally so, are on the line. If it depends on us being obedient to the Word, but it has to be in our heart. And so one of the things is, you know, being worn out by children is the end result of being disobedient to the word, starting with being, really being submitted to, really being submitted to your head and doing things and like having the same mind and the same judgment about how things are going to go in the home.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we realize this, that when God created and formed Adam and Eve, that he didn't form them already having children, which means that the marriage is supposed to come first. And we see what happened when Eve got from under her head. She bore children that created chaos in the whole world. And the same thing happens today. So what has to happen, and the reason why it is important that the wife be submitted to her husband in everything as unto the Lord, like the Bible says, is his authority in the home, and her submission to him uh, and his authority over his wife overrides her nurturing the children and really neutering. We have to we have to as parents not be afraid for our children to cry, to hurt their little feelings. Whatever the case may be, they'll get over it. That's life. And I think about this, as we've stated before, when babies are born, when they first come out of the womb, they don't have solid bones. They have cartilage for the purpose of being able to pass through the birth canal, so that bones don't get broken, stuff like that. They just cartilage. And even the head is soft to the point where of course, if they come through the birth canal, their head is shaped like a cone, and you shape their head, you reshape it, you help to reshape it by just rubbing it, not squeezing it together, just gently rubbing it, and it helps their head come back into shape. So the Lord gives us these things to show us how we shape our children. It's easier when they're small. It's better to shape cartilage than it is to break bones. And what happens when you allow your children to get out of order, and well, especially when they're supposed to know better, then now you got to break bones. Now you have to retrain them because they have already been trained, in the wrong direction, I should say. And so now, in other words, now you have to be a little extreme, what more extreme than what you would have had to have been had you just started from the jump with sit down means sit down. It ain't punishment to sit down, you know, and it ain't punishment to be quiet. You ain't got to always be talking. And I'm glad you got some ideas, but I got some too, and I got to do some stuff I got to do around the house. Sit down. That ain't child abuse, you know. And we can't, as parents, live in our children's emotions and live in their little broken hearts every time something don't go right that's hurt their little feelings. Because tomorrow they ain't gonna remember it. No, how many of y'all remember being born? How many of y'all were mad because mama should have pushed, but she was whatever? Ain't nobody remember that. And God have designed children to forget the trauma of being told to sit down when they get older. That ain't it's not the end of the world. And so I think sometimes we as adults, we think that our world is the same as theirs. And so, and I think we have to be careful that we're not the type of parent that don't want to be told something as adults. And so we in ourselves have a problem with telling our children something. There's nothing wrong with children living in an absolute. In other words, a structured environment. Children need structure. They should know, have an idea, especially as we're training them and they're getting older. They should have an idea of how their day is going to go. They should not wake up thinking they're going to freestyle every day. That every day is a new day, and I don't know what the Lord might send me over here. That ain't the life they living. They need, children need structure. And when they don't have structure and boundaries, then you have a zoo. You see, then that's what they'll turn your house into, is a zoo. They'll be bouncing all over the place. And what it does, it not only sets a bad atmosphere, but it also takes away from the parents getting things done. It also causes division between the parents, especially when they're different, and so it is important, like as my wife was stating earlier, that we don't get used to chaos, and it's only chaos when I can't get something else done, or I can't bring the whole day together at the end of the day. And sometimes the way people live is the children can do whatever they want. You can bounce off the walls, you can pour water on the floor, whatever you want to do it. Just don't, when you bounce off that wall, don't bounce in the pot that of food that I'm cooking. Cause now that's just gonna upset everything for when daddy get home. So when you bounce over there. Well, In other words, it ain't chaos unless it's some kind of way messing up your day and how the day is supposed to end. That that's not the way God intended for us to run our homes. Uh, and we need to be able to see the severity of what happens when children don't have structure. And so because what'll happen is you'll just be playing this game of, as long as you're not disturbing my day and disturbing what the outcome is going to be, you can do whatever you want to do, or just as long as it's not too crazy, and as long as we don't have company or whatever the case is. And so, but that's children need to be raised. If you have one child that don't ever have company, that one needs to know how to sit down. They need to know how to be quiet when they're told to be quiet. They need to know that when adults are talking, they don't talk. They need to know that they're not on the same level as adults. There's nothing wrong with children knowing that they are children. And that's not child abuse. And sometimes we can, I've heard adults say, when I was growing up, I couldn't talk, I couldn't say nothing, so I'm gonna let my child say whatever. And yeah, that's all fine and dandy until they get to talking back to you, and until they get to flexing with you. You see, and so we have to do things God's way without having to have an understanding about how it's all gonna play out or how it's detrimental. To me, we have to get to this place, especially as believers. If God said that this is the way it's supposed to go, I don't have to know what happens when it don't go the way He says it's supposed to go for me to do it the way He says for it to be done. If God said it, that's the way I'm supposed to do it. I don't have to know what the consequences are if I don't do it that way. And sometimes that's the life we live if we're not careful. We're just right there on the edge. Well, what happened? And then our testimony includes how we done went out and jacked up our whole life behind not obeying the word of God versus just obeying it because He's God, you see. And so I think that it's very important for a home to have structure. I think I've shared this before. Every house, every physical house, the house I'm sitting in now, it has structure. Now think of it this way. What would happen if you woke up one morning and you don't wake up in the bedroom, you wake up in the kitchen, but when you went to sleep, you went to sleep in your bedroom, and you didn't sleepwalk, but your house don't have structure, so it just moves around and it shifts around every single day anytime it feel like it. What if it just shifted around just during the day? I don't, the living room, it's cold by this wall. I don't like being on the north side over there by that street. I'm gonna move over. So you standing in the kitchen cooking, but the kitchen start moving, but you still standing there, and your kitchen turned into a bedroom. In other words, when we are living in a home, we can count on those rooms remaining exactly where they're supposed to be. We can count on wherever we put the pots at, they'll be in there when we come back for them. We have some type of structure. We and thank God we do, because if we didn't, we'd all go crazy. We'd all be in a nut house, just trying to figure out what the program is and who's in charge of this house, moving around every few seconds. So, and I'm using that as an example because think about our children, the little houses that we give birth to. They need structure the same way we need structure. The same way when we put something up, we want to be able to go to that exact same place and find it. You see that? The same way when we before we get a house, we go in, we look at the house, we like the fact that the living room is where it is. We like the size of the living room. We like the fact that the living room is attached to the kitchen, and we like all the whole setup. So we buy houses and we rent houses because we like the particular structure of the house, of how the house is set up. My wife and I, we for about 6 months we were house hunting before we bought our first house in Nashville. We were house hunting, And so why do people house hunt? We could see the outside of the house, online. We could see the inside online, but that didn't looking at pictures was not the same as actually going there and seeing the layout with our own eyes. In other words, seeing the structure of it with our own eyes. And so people for 6 months, I don't know how many houses we looked at, but I'd say probably over 50, maybe 60. So why are people looking at all these different houses instead of just looking at a picture and deciding, okay, I like that one? Or just looking at the outside of it and saying, okay, I like that one. Because the structure is on the inside. And they will house hunt until they find exactly what they're looking for, the exact conveniences. In other words, it's all about structure when you're dealing with a house. And so that's the way that's the way it is also when it comes to our lives. We need structure. Our children need structure. And my wife, my wife said she was talking to uh, one of our teenagers not too long ago. I think it was last week, and my wife was asking her, telling her, you need to think about what it is you're going to be doing in life. Like you need to have a plan, and you need to have some goals. And she said the girl said, well, why do I have to think? Why do everybody keep telling me I have to, So if that mind don't change, you know what's going to happen there. So
Mhm.
if we're not careful, that's what we'll be raising. Children with no goals, not thinking about making decisions today and not thinking about the consequences of those decisions tomorrow. That comes from lack of structure, not just freestyling, just not, I just however I feel in the day, that's what I'm doing today. And usually that person don't hardly get anything done because they don't feel like it. I promise you, I didn't feel like getting out driving in the snow. That But God have structured this whole universe, and we as little peons can't come and rebel against it because we don't like it. You see that? And I think I did a message on that as well. And so we have to be careful because I'm gonna tell you, an unstructured life, when you peel back all of the excuses that people have, I'm creative and I need my space, and I'm just being led by the spirit. When you peel all of the excuses back that people make for not having structure in their life, it all boils down to one thing: rebellion against God. That's what it boils down to. Because God is a God of order. He's a God of order, and he sets things in order, and we as believers, especially as believers, we have to be willing to follow that order without question.
Hey, I was just thinking about I guess keeping things in order and how important it is. Like we've stressed how important it is to really be of the same mind, of the same judgment. And I thought about how, like when I was younger, you could be in a room with, older women and they could be talking, but they will catch something in their peripheral. They might catch a child, doing something and they didn't even stop talking, but they might point their finger or, something, get their attention and get them back in order. But and I want to say that to address this idea of kind of like you said, not paying attention to your surroundings and not knowing what's going on around you. But one of the things that was brought up was this idea of being busy with one thing and not paying attention to children. And I've seen it even, in Truth Academy where it could be, a bunch of mothers in a room, but and it could be one small thing that seemed to be getting out of order, but nobody either don't notice or just don't think enough of it to address it. And so what happens is I think it's a wrong mindset to think, oh, I can get so busy that I just don't see what's going on with my children, so I miss a lot of things that need to be corrected. The idea would be just like I said earlier about the driving thing, to have it in your heart. So it's easy to see what's out of order if you've already accepted that something is not acceptable, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if a child is not allowed to sit on the sofa, then you tell that child to sit wherever on the floor, and you just look in your peripheral and see that they're not on the floor, then automatically that should click in your brain, okay, you're out of order because you're not where I told you to be. But if in your heart you feel like, well, you should be able to sit on the sofa, you'll miss it every time
Mm-hmm.
because it's not in your heart. Like you haven't really sold out to it, to the idea of it. Um you're trying to execute something that you don't really believe in other words.
And I want to just say this for those of us that's listening in that may not understand that example. When my wife and I, when we were growing up, so sitting on the sofa was a privilege. We spent most of our time outside playing, getting dirty. You were not going to come and plop your backside on somebody's sofa. That just was not going to happen. And so it was very common when you walked into a home where when I was growing up to see children just sitting on the floor. But again, the idea is if so that could be daddy's rule. Don't sit on that couch. I don't want my children sitting on the couch. Hey, this it's not the end of the world. But that could be the daddy's rule or father's rule. I don't want my children sitting on this sofa. I don't want them sitting there. And for whatever reason, that's his rule. Well, if the mother, the wife don't, she don't agree with it, then that's something subconsciously she could overlook. But that don't stop it from causing problems between her and her husband. And so, I believe that it's very important that that's the reason why, and I know that people don't like to hear it, but that's the reason why there is a hierarchy in the family. That is the reason why there's one person sitting at the top in the flesh. That's the husband. God understood that everything wouldn't be worked out through debating. He understood that there would be some things that husband and wife would not be able to come to terms with as far as compromising. So, in those issues, one of them outranks the other one, which that would be the husband. Now, again, I know folks don't like to hear that, but I believe God got more sense than we got. And I just got enough sense, just enough to follow him and to believe what he says about it. you know. And there have been times my wife didn't necessarily agree or necessarily understand, I should say, everything that I've laid out. But what happens is when she submit to it, later on she'll understand, okay, so now I see why. But what happens, but a wife that's fighting her husband and not even entering into that, I'm gonna go ahead and do it, or I'm gonna go ahead and submit to it, and without understanding it, she never get to the place of understanding it. That's the reason why it remained a constant fight. You see, and so I believe that it's important that the wife believes that her husband knows what he's talking about, and just love your marriage enough and love your husband enough to submit to that husband with whatever rules he may have in his home. You see, because that husband, he sees the big picture. The husband, he sees the whole picture of how he want his home ran. And when the wife, especially if the wife grew up seeing mama run it all, and no daddy around or whatever the case is, then she assumed that going into the marriage, at least I at least know how to run a home. And then she feels like her input is just as important and should carry just as much weight as the husband's input should. And so that of course that causes problems.
I think one other thing that just came to my mind concerning that is the importance. I think you mentioned it earlier about it's okay to let children know that they're children. It is very important for mothers not to let their children think that they are on the same level. And I think this came out in a fellowship recently, this idea of children thinking they have all the same rights and privileges as the parents. Well, if you're eating something, I should be eating something. If you're enjoying even a movie, then I should be able to sit down. Or if you have a phone, then I should be able to use your phone, or, different things like that. I think it is extremely important. And it goes back to God's hierarchy and how things are done. Those children are not equal to the parents. They don't deserve to have everything that the parents have. They haven't worked for it. They don't appreciate it. And they should not feel that they're equal to their parent. They need to understand that structure that's there and the authority that comes with it. Because if they don't understand the authority, as long as a child thinks they're on the parent's level, there's no way for structure to be in place. They're not going to listen, because in their minds it's just like a lot of children now. You can see they'll get smart like with another child their age, like, I don't have to listen to you. And that's pretty much what the parent will get when they treat that child like they're on the same level. That child does not feel the need. There's no urgency there. There's no comprehension about even submitting to an authority that doesn't exist in their mind. So it is really, really important that children understand that they are not equal to, they don't have the same rights, and they do not enjoy all the same privileges as their parents.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because that's one of the things, my wife and I, when we deal with children, we let them know there are some children in this group that outrank you. And they do that by age. And you're a few years younger than another child, you don't get to tell another child no when they have your best interest in mind and they're telling you to sit down and this now is not the time or whatever the case is. And I know there are parents that have a problem with some other child telling their child how to behave, but you know, I guess the question is, when does it stop? At what point, who can? Because some adults got a problem with grown folks that's older than them, that's old enough to be their parents, telling their children, to behave or, what to do or whatever the case is. And so with that comes chaos, and again, children have to know that there's a difference between adults and them, and there's a difference between them and other people, and to respect, and to respect their elders, basically, to respect their elders. I tell you, this is an honorless generation. This is an honorless society that don't know anything about honor. But we as believers, we supposed to know something about it. Yeah, we supposed to know something about it, and so, and we have to instill those things into our children. We have to do that. That's not automatic for them. We have to instill those things into them. We have to teach them and train them. Now, here's the thing: when you train a child, he knows how to behave. Now, you think about it. I don't believe 10-year-old children ought to be wearing Pampers. So, and this is what I'm saying. We as adults, we got enough sense to train our children in some stuff. Our children just are not trainable. They're trainable. And we would be hot. I know I would be if I had to change a 10-year-old's diaper or a 5-year-old's diaper. I had a grandson, have a grandson when he was 2 years old. And he loved pooping in his pamper and then coming and showing you the log that he had. And basically like, yeah, and you got to change me. Except I wouldn't. Go, come on, Grammy, come on, Momo, he's got a gift for you. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. And so, why? Because you know better. You've been trained better, and that's the way we have to be that adamant. And I believe one reason why we're so adamant about training our children when it comes to Pampers because we get tired of buying them, and they're not going down in price. So money and not wanting to smell grown people's feces is is our motivation for training them in that area. And so maybe what we need to do as believers and as adults is find some motivation to do everything else we're supposed to do when it comes to training our children, you know.
I just thought about something. I I think it was just this past Sunday that happened when you say, children are honorless, and how we need to train our children, because we were gathering for prayer, and I was standing in the doorway, and somebody's child came, bum rushed me from behind, and my reaction, I really had to catch myself, because we've talked about it, and this is why it's important to train, really train your children, because children shouldn't feel like they can bump into adults and run over them and things like that. Um, and it was kind of one of those reactions where, okay, you almost got through into the middle of next week. Don't, and I'm like, sit down somewhere, you know. But we have to train our children to pause when they see adults, and don't think that they can just run in, and that's not something that they need to be 10 years old before they learn. That's something that we have to teach our children, to really be respectful. And it's so cute. One of the little girls in school, whenever she'll see me, and I think she does it with all adults, she'll say, "Can I give you a hug, Sister Bolden?" And I always thought it was interesting that she asked. She don't just run up, and not that anything's wrong with that, but I just thought it was interesting that she asked, "Can I give you a hug?" But that comes from her being trained.
Hmm.
And so, and it's not impossible. We just have to let our children know, again, what boundaries there are, what's okay and what's not okay, so that they will know, what's appropriate, and what's respectful, more than anything, when it comes to them dealing with adults.
And I tell you, when we train our children for structure, because my observation in the years that the Lord have allowed me to live in this world, I know when adults didn't grow up with structure, because it's very hard for them to keep a job. They got 100 ideas that they're gonna do, except none of it get done. And because they've lived a structureless life, because maybe mama and daddy didn't give them structure, whatever the case was. But so we give our children structure so they'll know how to be in a structured environment and know how to function when they become adults. So that when they get a job and they're sitting at a desk somewhere, they're not pulling their hair out because they mom and daddy didn't tell them to sit down for a few hours a day. So all of this go together. And so we train them and give them structure so they'll know how to behave when they become adults. Sitting in the classroom is not the end of the world to them. I've seen people hate their job because they had to do the same thing over and over again. That's somebody that don't like structure. But the same person, they'd be pulling their hair out if they had to come up with something different every single day. They'd hate that too. You see? And so we train our children to have structure, so no matter what it is that they are involved in, when they get older, they know how to function and they know how to be in a place of order. And they don't see order as being oppressive. They don't see it. It's not a conspiracy to them. That somebody's telling them what to do and how to do, and and things like that. And so all right, brother Tank, sister Tank, did y'all have anything y'all wanted to say to what we're saying?
I don't have anything to say right now.
There was a lot of stuff that was said just now that I believe I was I was saying there was a lot of stuff that was said just now that was a blessing to me. The first one being that husband's authority want to pretty much line everything up, and then it also being in my heart as well. Um, I guess I never see. Um, I was saying there was a lot of stuff that was said just now that was a blessing, and just where you were starting off, how it starts with submitting and how the Lord He has a hierarchy for a reason, and I guess like I can see how you were explaining Sister Bolden how that stuff like it has to be in my heart to follow my husband's rules and things, and I can see because I have like it's not in my heart. It was not in my heart to I guess see things the way my husband see or just be like minded. How much chaos and confusion and turmoil that caused when he um like it was a lot that was said. Yeah.
Okay, so here's something that I'd like to say. I'd like to add to what we were saying. So one thing I think you can do to kind of help the children uh, become more structured is you could play, I guess, teams with them. And this is what I mean. So you wake up in the morning, as their mother what all you need to get done. Um, you know what by what time you want different things done during the day. And so what you do is you say, hey, today we're gonna do this. Today we're gonna do laundry, or today we're gonna cook. And so y'all need to help mommy do these things. And so to me, I think one way to help children have structure is by giving them little chores to do, giving them things to do, and making them feel like they're part of the team. So this is our outcome. This is what we want to take place, and this is what we want to happen today. So and so, you're in charge of doing this. And then when you're done with that, then you just sit down, and then I'll tell you, what next to do, you know. And then at a certain time, we'll all eat lunch together, or we'll watch a movie, or whatever the case is, and then we're going to go back to doing this, whatever. In other words, helping them, not just saying, hey, get out the way. Will you just sit down until I get done? But find ways to uh, incorporate them into your day, even if it means at different times. Okay, so none of y'all are big enough to do what I'm about to do now, so y'all just need to sit down and be still for a little bit, and until I get this done, and then we'll move on to another project or whatever the case is. But either way, you have to make it look like and make them understand that they are a part of the day and that they are a part of you getting things done throughout the day, if that make any sense.
I mean, I think that's a great point. I don't have anything to add to it, but I think that's a really great point, even to see it that way, because when you talk about teamwork, it has such a positive connotation to it. And sometimes even without realizing it, we can hear, because I hear, I kind of hear we use the words, and I personally don't think there's anything wrong with rules, but sometimes people can subconsciously see that as a negative thing. Let me just set a whole bunch of rules and we just follow them, but it's not that. This is about building a life together. This is about strengthening our family, and we are a team as a family. Even if like if you take sports for an example, you have a team but you still have a coach, and so you think of like that husband being that coach, he's over the team, but everybody else who's under him in rank still have a part to play, to bring everything together. And that's, I just thought that was a really good analogy, you know concerning just being a team and making them feel like they're a part of it, and letting them know that they are an important part of the family. Sometimes you have to sit down, sometimes you have to help, but it all helps to, like you said, bring the help us meet our goal at the end of the day, or at the end of the task or whatever.
And so I think I have a I think so let's give out some homework. Uh, what do you all think about implementing that, Brother Tanks?
I think that's a really good idea because it's like you said, it'll have them working in teams, and both of them would have, well, even Nathaniel, they will all have something to do at any given moment. And if there's not anything for them to do, or what not, for, like just like you said, if it's not something that they can do because of their age or their size, then some hold on, we're going to have something else for you. I like that because it stops their mind from just going all over the place and want to do different things. It's just focus, structure. I like that.
Yeah. And kind of like what the old people used to say, an idle mind is the devil's workshop.
Yes, sir.
You give children something to do. And to me, like I don't, even as an adult, when I'm doing something during the day, when I get it done, I feel like I've accomplished something. And children need that same, they need that same drive in them. Of course, we don't want to turn them into busybodies, but giving them something to do, and to help them have a sense of accomplishment. I've done this, I've accomplished something. And because I think that the other side of it is what we see with the lack of structure. They got all that energy, and they need to expend some of that. And the way they do it is by giving them something to do. And I've seen children, I've seen parents give their child something to do, and they so happy when they do it. They got this sense of, you know, pride, but not in a bad way. Just man, I've done it. And so I think that's very important. So what I would like to see is, since Brother Tank's like doing recording footage and stuff, I'd like to see y'all um, do that with your children. Lay out some structure, and Brother Tank, so you know how to edit the footage and put it together. And maybe when we come back together, maybe next week, whenever we come back together, we can see some of the footage. We can play some of the footage for everybody, and just seeing their little reactions when they're getting things done, around the house and helping their mom and stuff like that do different things. you know what do you think about that?
I think that's a good idea. That'll give us um, some videos of our family, doing different things. We can show them when they grow up, something like that, and that can even be used as a type of teaching mechanism to our future children. I guess you could say, showing them how we all work together and things like that. So I like that.
All right. So, Brother Tank, since did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, sir. I feel like a lot of stuff that was brought out was, you know, pretty much spot on. It doesn't like to me. It doesn't matter. Um, that's like what happened in between because it's like even though it happened in between that and anything else, it was all covered.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the things that I want to brought up was covered already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. One thing I was thinking about was um, with your wife was sharing about I think it was either you or your wife about coming inside and not being able to sit on the sofa. I dealt with that growing up too. I never had I was never mad about it, but I never understood why. But just the thought of we all was outside growing up, but when you come inside, no, you're not about to sit on my sofa. And that's how I feel now. But even though they're not necessarily outside getting sweaty and dirty, I still don't want you sitting on the sofa, especially you got a diaper. I don't want no big diaper.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so there's something that caught my attention because my mom, she did it with us as well growing up. Like she can be on the phone or having a conversation with somebody, and like just out of the corner of her eye, she can see us doing something and correct us without her having to stop her conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I would like to see happen as well. That my wife would be able to correct something without having a whole lot of craziness go on behind her correcting it, and like
Mm-hmm.
I go out her way to just stop it.
Yeah.
And so I would like to be able to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, and Brother Tanks, of course, that wasn't for us, that wasn't the rule until we left the house. But I was just sitting here thinking about when you were talking about, I was sitting here thinking about how our parents, they trained us in every aspect of life. Because even when we were allowed to sit on the sofa, we had to do it a certain way. We had to turn around and we had to sit down. We couldn't plop down. We couldn't get up, we couldn't use our knees to climb up on it. It was like you had, they taught us you're not about to, I'm still paying rent a center for this sofa. You're not about to have my sofa mean mugging, you know. So it was just and I remember when our friends came to visit, hey, look, this is how we do. You have to turn around and sit down. Don't plop. It was all kind of, little ins and outs that we learned, and we didn't think anything was wrong with it. That was just the way it was. And the number one thing was no foot, and don't put your feet in the sofa.
Yes, sir.
Don't put your feet. Don't put your shoes. Don't put your, yeah. Don't put your foot, up there. You want to sit Indian style, you do that on the floor. You see. Yeah. And so, all right. So go ahead, Brother Tanks.
Wow, you put me on the spot. Wow.
You ain't got to say nothing. You ain't got to say it.
Wow.
So it's very. And let me just give Brother Tanks this drum roll. It's very important, and there's a reason why we're talking about this now. All right, brother. Thanks.
Well, me and my wife just found out, I think like maybe a week ago, that we are going to be pregnant with our sixth child.
That's a blessing.
Oh my God.
So we're excited, very excited.
Yeah, that's a blessing. That's a blessing. We're happy for y'all. That's a blessing. So I think that's very good. I think that's a blessing. I believe heaven rejoices when another child is brought into this world, and that, to me, to me, it's a blessing that the Lord trusts us with His own. That's the way I see it. You know, we tend to think of our children as being our own, and because mom and daddy came together, that's the reason why the child is here, because the Lord wanted the child here. And that's the way I see it. So the Lord, in His grace and mercy, He says, "Okay, I'm bringing this child into the world, and I'm giving it to you to raise. And this is how I want you to raise him." And that's the reason why we have this discussion, these types of discussions, because we want to do things God's way. To When God thinks enough of us to bless us with a child, and we say it's our child, but really it belongs to God. But God, even in that, I see God's grace and mercy, because He puts in that child DNA to link them to who's going to raise them. And so so He loves us that much, where we see certain traits, we see certain features that God have given that child so for us to identify with. But we have to think about, this is really, God, you gave me this child to raise. You trusted me to raise this child. I'm going to raise him to bring glory back to you. I'm going to raise him to bring glory to you. And that is ultimately what the Lord wants, is for us to raise. In fact, let's go to the second chapter of the book of Malachi. Let's see. Let's see what's a good place to start. Let's go ahead and let's just start reading at verse 11. Second chapter of the book of Malachi, we'll start reading at verse 11.
Judah has dealt.
Let's back up to verse 10.
Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously, every man against his brother, by profaning the covenant of our fathers?
Everybody see that?
Judah,
Go ahead.
Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange God. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yet ye say, wherefore?
In other words, why?
Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet she is thy companion and the wife of thy covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit. And wherefore one?
In other words, why did he make one?
that he might seek a godly seed.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth.
So, and this lets us know why the Lord want husband and wife to be on one accord. It is important, and He asks why, so that he might seek a godly seed. In other words, godly children comes about when husband and wife are on one accord with one another. And so, I think that that's important for us to bring that out in this lesson here. That for us to raise children the way God wants us to raise them, we as husband and wife, we have to be on one accord, you know. And you think about intimacy and what it takes to create a child. You know, most of the time, husband and wife are on one accord in intimacy. Is when the woman's not being raped or whatever, you know. They're on one accord with that. And so I guess what this is what I'm saying. What it took to make that child, that kind of one accord, it also takes to raise a child. You know, being on one accord where you're the same of the same mind and the same judgment and all of that, and that's what produces a godly seed. All right, all right. So, brother Tanks, sister Tanks, we look forward to seeing this footage. Uh, you know, and sharing that, and we thank you all again for talking with us again this week and allowing the Lord to use your marriage to help strengthen other marriages. All right. Did you all have anything else you all wanted to say before we stop?
I don't have anything to say right now.
Okay. Sister Tank? All right. All right. Well, we thank you all again for joining us, and we pray that God will continue to bless you and strengthen your marriages. All right.